Today we have John Nadworny with us. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're a certified financial planner and you work a lot with special needs families. But today we brought you on to talk about something called succession planning. Why don't we start by explaining what that is? What do you mean by succession planning and why is it important?
Succession planning involves a parent or guardian or caretaker identifying a strategy or plan to take care of their son or daughter, whomever, when they're no longer here or they're unable to any longer.
How would you, like, if somebody called you and said, hey, I heard you do succession planning, I think I might need that support. What would you do?
First of all, what you said, I hear you do succession planning. Succession planning really isn't done with a professional or someone else. It really is something that the parent or guardian has to take on by themselves. And with, I would say, not in an island by itself, but with some coaching. In some respects, succession planning is almost a lifetime of planning, where it's something you have to think about in the back of your mind. It's, what if I'm no longer here? What if I can't be here? At the same time, too, we're obviously, I'm 69, my son's 35, and I'm thinking about the plan ultimately will be here. But at the same time, someone who is younger, a catastrophe could happen. And you want to make sure if a catastrophe happens, or if you're aging like me, you really have to think about who do I trust, who will be there, who cares, who loves my son or daughter. There's many different factors you have to consider in identifying the best match to actually carry on after you're not here any longer.
So that being said, what would you say are the first steps in doing that? Like, what would step 1, 2, and 3 be that a family should be considering?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer you with something you won't expect.
All right.
Okay, let's hear it.
The first step is to go through the emotional process of recognizing that I'm not going to be here, but also no one's going to do the exact same thing I did my whole life. There's no one that can replace you. So I think you have to admit that. I'm not going to find, John Nadworny and my wife, Susan Nadworny. It's what you have to really identify, begin to think, well, what are the roles that I do? So one of the first steps you have to go through, you have to identify the various roles that you do as a parent. And we used to have these pictures. We'd say you're number 1, you're a chef, and number 2, you're a nurse. Number 3, you're a chauffeur. So we used to actually draw a picture of the chauffeur hat. So what you really, the first steps to do would be, number 1, obviously, emotion. Say, all right, I have to have a plan here. And number 2 is think about what you do. And it won't be one person that can be. It will be multiple people. And so once you go through the process of breaking down, there was a checklist you go through, would be actually one thought process would be also, though, not just a checklist, what are the daily routines that you go through, list them out, and who will actually do those at some point in your life. Another way we also have people plan to think about this, they always would say, what would happen if you were to go away for a weekend? What would you do? And it's interesting. People plan that. And they put stickums on the refrigerator, whatever it is, to the caretaker. Well, my wife would always do that for when she went away, because she was really the person that kind of held it all together. If she went away with her friends, she would identify, give me a list of things I had to do. So I think the process actually it's a long process you have to think about, and it's a slow process you have to think about to really mark out what will happen when you're no longer here.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking about our listeners primarily have loved ones in their 40s, like Matt's 52, almost 52. What advice could you give families if they've gotten a late start on this? Like it just, I'm 78. What if it just hit me at 77 that, I probably ought to have a plan in place?
Well, it's interesting when you say if I got a late start on it, in some respects, you may have to restart again, because you may identify a person who will carry on when you're no longer here, but their circumstances may change where they no longer may be able to do it. And they also, there may be someone aging like you. So I think it's a continuous process. You have to reevaluate each year, because as we all know, other people's circumstances change, where they may have been the perfect person, the perfect candidate, but due to life changes, they move away. So it's an area that this flexibility has to always be in place, and that's why it's important not to just have one person. You think you have a bench of people, and we had a session with a group of families, and when one of the parents, which I thought was a great idea, she had an advisory board, and so they have a special needs trust, and she had other people involved that they would meet every once a year, just talk, get an update on what her son is updating the son. What's it like? And so, but then again, she said, look, that's paper. That's not perfect. That's not reality, because the group of people, their circumstances change each year. So I think you have to keep that in mind and always be refreshing things.
I love that idea. I think you talk about it as building a team. It's so important, not only for the updating year to year, but I would assume that whoever you have in charge, I think you talked about it as like a captain of the ship, right? There's a team, and then there's the person who's running it all. I would imagine that after the parents are gone, whoever you have on that team or as the captain of the ship, you would also suggest maybe that they go through this process too, so that in perpetuity, there's always a bench, there's always a second in command or options. Am I correct?
Exactly. And let me say this too, is that, I've been working with families my son James is 35, for 32 years. And I have to say, this concept is not my idea. I learned from parents. I learned what people do. I learned from talking to families who always think about what's going to happen, how long you're here, but they never do anything about it. And so I thought I'd just clarify, this is, so the comments I may have are really experiences that I've learned from others. And maybe I'll give you a couple examples. Is that,
yes, please.
Like what we did, not my situation, is that my daughter is extremely active, involved with James' life, and my son is. I'm extremely fortunate that they're really involved and they want to step to the plate. But at the same time, I really never wanted to talk much about it to them, because I didn't want their life to interfere. I wanted them to do their thing until probably 7 or 8 years ago. It was Thanksgiving Day, and my daughter pressed us. And I said, we're all set. We're all set. We're okay. And then she really pressed. And I think it was my daughter and son pressing me made me realize that technically on one side, through the classic planning things, you see everyone talk about the future planning, the special needs trust, make sure you have enough funds in the trust, make sure if you have insurance, you have the legal documents in place. I had all those things in place. And then until she really started pressing, I really truly recognized that I didn't have everything in place. I didn't have the most important thing in place formally, was who was going to replace me. And, all the money in the world can't replace you. And I say that we've worked with some folks that have more than adequate resources, and we work with some folks that have limited resources. The folks with the limited resources have a plan in place to replace them. They're really in a better situation than people with plenty of money. But, I know one thing for sure with my son James, every day he leaves the house and he gets money. His little drawer we have, he takes money to buy Coke. He has it could be $1, $2, $20. He has no idea. So for him, it isn't the money. It's, it's someone taking him to get the Coke. It's all these other things that's so important in his life that we have to plan for.
And we should let our listeners know who James is. James is your son, and he has Down syndrome. Is that correct?
Yeah, James is 35, has Down syndrome, and he requires some significant supports. And I think the nicest thing is he's 35, but every night I get him to bed and he gives me a little kiss on the cheek. I kiss him. So life is awesome.
So sweet. And I think your approach, John, I love the approach, this holistic approach that you take, right? Because you really focus on the emotional piece of this. And that's really important to so many of our listeners here. I think there's some things we can highlight that you just touched upon in what you just said. As a sibling, I can relate to your daughter, right? I always had told my mom and dad, if anything ever happens to you guys, I will take care of Matthew. Matthew's going to come and stay with me, and he can live with me, and I'll take care of him. And we have another brother too who would probably do the same thing. But I think these are conversations that a lot of families either avoid because they don't want to talk about when we're not here anymore and what life is going to be like. Or there's the assumption maybe from the parent side that the other siblings will take care of the loved one with Down syndrome. But that's not always how it works, right? And some families don't have other siblings to step in and take care of the loved one. So there's a couple different layers here. But one thing that I want to touch on just from my own personal experience, I always said, if anything happens to you, Mom and Dad, I will take care of Matthew. I didn't know the course of his life and the journey with Alzheimer's that we were going to encounter and what that was all going to entail. And I even felt, and it's okay, I'm not ashamed to admit that I had feelings of guilt when Matthew was going deeper into the journey with Alzheimer's. I kind of took a step back and I was almost ashamed of myself to say, I don't know if I could take care of him. I don't know if I had the resources or the emotional stability or, do I have enough supports? I mean, I was worried about that. I would do anything in the world to, but it was the first time that I had this pause in saying, I always was going to take care of Matthew. And now I'm looking at the situation. I'm seeing the whole team, like you said, the whole team that's involved. And I questioned if I could do that. So if you want to speak to that a little bit, because I think these are important conversations that families of multiple children need to have. And also, let's not ignore the real feelings that go along with these conversations because they're tough and it's, things that we need to be honest and open about. But what can you say to that?
I think there's two points I'd like to talk about. First is the emotional part. People think emotionally, since your child's born, emotional is number one, leaving early intervention. Number two is emotional when at age 18, planning for the SSI, guardianship. And there's some emotions there. Number three, the big emotions is when someone turns 22, what's going to happen? The school bus is no longer here. People plan for that transition a lot of times. What life is different then. But it's interesting. The biggest transition in our lives, most people don't plan for and they don't recognize. And I think that one guiding benchmark here would be recognizing that, yep, you have to plan for this transition on steroids compared to the other transitions. So that would be, and I think, and there's nothing wrong with a parent recognizing that either. And I think the other thing would be, is that with Kristen, I think it's important for parents to think about the different role that children will play. And you as a daughter or son, whoever it may be, the role that you automatically think is going to be replacing your parent. Mm-hmm. And I know I don't want my son or daughter to replace me, but what role I want them to have, I want them to be oversee things. We'll call it the CEO, the person that knows all the advocacy your parents did for your son. You have to take that role on. You'll probably have to take the role on of just overseeing, going to annual meetings that they have, and just taking the oversight role rather than taking the direct support person role. And it's okay. And I would think, and I can't speak for every parent, but most of the families we work with, they don't expect their children to take the direct caregiver role over. And what role they would hope for would be the big picture role, the advocate, to explain the pros and cons. James is nonverbal. So a big thing that we do, Susan and I do, whenever any new people come involved in James's life, we really tell him, because he can't talk doesn't mean he doesn't understand things. He's very bright. He understands. So our role is to communicate what James is like to other people. So I think that would be the key as a sibling to recognize that. And as a parent, the key is to express that and say, let's think about what your life is like. And let's think about what you can or would like to do, will do. So things can carry on for it would be your son, Matt, and my son, James, whoever's son or daughter is.
I've come to know a lot of amazing siblings as I've been on this journey with Matt. And I hear it way too often that there are siblings who end up in a very responsible role, either overseeing or actually doing direct care. And many of them go into that role not having a clue about what their parents thought were important for the quality of life of that loved one. And I was on your website and I saw that you have a document on a letter of intent, which I think would be a really good thing to let people know about, because I just perused it very quickly, but I could see that if that was filled out by a parent or someone who's in that CEO role, and then somebody else had to pick up the responsibility of making sure that this individual has the best life possible, that's the kind of information that's needed. But could you talk a little bit about that letter of intent that you have on your website?
Yeah, what it does, it provides, I'll call it data points for your son and daughter. From data point being the name of the doctor, direct caregivers' names and phone numbers, but the softer information like that, where people just don't have, the likes and dislikes, the tricks in communication, all the small tricks that you've learned over your lifetime about your daughter or son that other people don't immediately pick up. So I think the other part of the letter of intent would be the vision, what you envision for your son or daughter, the future for your son or daughter. And I think the nice thing about that too is you can, if you set that up when your son or daughter's early, you review things, say, well, gee, how am I achieving what we think we'd like to achieve for John, for James? It lets you annually review things, look at things. And I think the vision piece also, it wouldn't be the legal piece, but at some point, there will be a trustee involved. If you do have a special needs trust, there will be a trustee involved, and they typically will need some guidance. You hope that they need guidance in terms of how do they spend the money. And I think that one issue, and this may be a bit off the topic, but it is the same thing on succession planning is that we'd be providing guidance to that fiduciary who is responsible for the money. And my point would be is that some fiduciaries, it's different when you're dealing with a child with special needs than a fiduciary of a typical person or a family fiduciary. The child with special needs, the ideal situation would be, if you think of it, is the day your son or daughter dies, the day there's no more money left, the day the money depletes. What that means is that you were able to give your son or daughter an enriched life with everything that was saved, versus the typical role of fiduciary is they want the money to continue for generations. So in some respects, the classic fiduciary person has to have an appreciation, say, look at, we saved this money here would be for your son Matt, my son James. We saved this money for James. I didn't save this for my daughter Alex, my son Ben. So plan accordingly. And we've seen cases where that type of guidance wasn't seen by fiduciaries, and they end up with more money than what they need to. In the meantime, they could have really done, I would say, excuse this word, stupid things with the money, but that's okay. Sometimes our kids like stupid things.
It's quality of life, right?
But then again, there is a fiduciary responsibility of making sure the money doesn't run out. But at the same time, we want our son and daughter to have repeat the same great life possible. So that would be back to letter of intent. That would be part of the vision that you have for your son and daughter, and how everything does tie together with a team approach.
Great. Yeah, I love that. I was thinking about, doing stupid things. I'm actually kind of starting the research on taking a trip on Amtrak multiple days and doing a sleeper car. And it's pricey. If I want to sit in a coach for 3 days, it's not awful. But if I want to sleep in a bed over 2 nights, it's going to cost a lot of money. And it's like, okay, am I going to do that? And it's like, I'm leaning towards, you betcha I am, because it's something I've wanted to do for years. It's on my bucket list. So it's quality of life to me. So I think we need to remember that with our kiddos who, have someone looking over their funds, that they need to have fun too. They need
Right.
to enjoy their lives as long as they can. So I like that, John.
Yeah. And I think Jadine and John, to what you're speaking to is simply about, right, life is going to change and be difficult when a parent dies and you're no longer there. So the least amount of stress that we can add into their routine in their life it's about continuing the things that they love to do and what they want to do and continuing that quality of life. And sometimes I think we just overthink it a little bit. And to go back to what you said, Don, what is your vision of life for your child? What do they love? What do they enjoy? What makes them happy? What brings them joy and fulfillment? And, you know, if they go to a therapeutic horse riding program, like, we want them to continue to be able to do that when you're no longer here, or if they're a part of a social group. And so I think sometimes just thinking about the simpler things and not overthinking the big picture is what it comes down to, because we want them to continue to have that quality of life and do the things that they love doing. And if I'm wrong, correct me, but I mean, I think that's a big takeaway of what you're saying. And I also want to thank you for saying that about the siblings earlier, because it's so easy for us as siblings to want to replace our parents when they're no longer here, to give our sibling that consistency. But that's really not what it's about. I want to stay in my role as a sister, or, you know, my brother as a brother. It's not our job to become the parents once our parents are no longer here. So thank you for pointing that out and just saying, continue to be the advocate that you've always been for them, if that's been your role. Don't try to be the mom or the dad. So I appreciate that.
Well, we're thinking too, I think one thing we have to mention is that sometimes people don't always have siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really have to talk about that. And it's not the end of the world. What made me think about that, we worked with a number of different professional trustees who are actually served as guardians. And the classic is that one of the guardians, every month, he used to make sure he had a livery service pick up the gentleman and drive the gentleman to the racetrack. And he enjoyed doing that. So the guardian got it. Every month he took him, this guy picked him up, went to track, brought him home. This gentleman enjoyed doing that one event. And so I think when it comes to it is that siblings, and it's interesting too, siblings, sometimes maybe the parent may not want a sibling to be involved, right?
Correct.
So we have to recognize that if someone doesn't have a sibling, or if siblings aren't involved, there are professional, at least in Massachusetts, we have professional guardianship associations, professional trustees, but it doesn't mean that that's the case. And we always say is that some points on this would be that it doesn't have to, someone always thinks, well, gee, I have to find someone younger. Well, the fact is, if you have someone who was not younger, who is the most important thing, they have a good skill set and think, because they will then have someone identify, so they're no longer able to take care, they can think through finding someone the best fit. So you really have to look at the candidate, whoever you may consider, is a package, but a number of different factors have to be involved. And personally, I'd rather take someone who is 60 years old, I picked that number arbitrarily, 60 years old, who loves my son, who cares for my son, who I know if I'm gone tomorrow, there's a few good years left in that person, but they'll be able to identify someone else. Versus someone who's 30, who perfectly meets the age requirement, but you know what? They have so many other things going on in their life today, and they may not be the best candidate today, but tomorrow would be. So you think of it, there can be a way there, a carry-on succession plan involved with someone today, and it doesn't have to just be one person.
And I like that you highlight that it's not one and done. It has to be a living process. Our experience, at least my experience with my Aunt Kathy, since she was so much older than me, and she was herself so much younger than her other siblings. By the time she needed help, her siblings were all in their 70s and 80s. So what my grandparents had put in place really needed to be rethought by the time Kathy needed help, to include the younger generation.
I think the other piece of advice would be is that when you do have to ask someone for the role, is really think about what you're asking for. Because if you don't think about what you're asking for, you just say, well, gee, will you take care of Johnny when I'm no longer here? You can get different answers, but one may be immediate yes, and one may be a no. And if someone gives an immediate yes, and if Johnny is involved, that's maybe just as bad as someone giving a no, because they don't know if it's a very complicated situation and they fail at the role, better off not even having that person anyway. So what I'm saying is that in addition to that, though, we had a situation where the person said no. And they said, well, gee, if you think of it, would you say yes? This case was very involved. And the point would be, you really have to be prepared and set expectations. Gee, this is what I think. If you can help with this piece, this is together. Well, I'm not going to ask you to replace me. But if you identify what the expectations are up front, you're not only doing yourself a favor, but you're doing the person you favor who you asking to help. And it will go a lot easier than just arbitrarily saying, gee, well, you took over. You really have to think through this process. Can be you do the letter of intent first as your backup, as backup information. You be prepared to ask questions. It's a very serious conversation. And even when it comes to trustees and guardians, I always say that, a lot of times people go to meet with the attorney to do the wills and trusts, and they ask, who do you want? They pick a name. Well, we were out to eat at a restaurant. We really didn't understand the menu. It was actually yesterday for lunch. There was a lot involved in the menu. And we probably spent more time talking about what's on that menu than sometimes you can be in an estate planning meeting
Right.
talking about who the guardian is.
Right.
So true.
That's a very good.
So you
very
really
good
have to
point.
be
Yes.
prepared for some of these, prepared for the next step. And again, is that it don't feel bad if you haven't done anything, because it's the emotions it's probably the hardest thing you have to think to do would be when you're long age. You don't even want to think about it. And my wife used to run these things called the leadership series here in Massachusetts, where she used to teach people to advocate for themselves. And she did this when James was very young. And I'll never forget this, the lasting impact. She said, I want my son to die a minute before I die.
Mm.
It's
Yep.
so deep,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To think of it.
Yeah, that's profound.
So
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be that way. If you plan through, you think through with as the foundation would be what you do in that letter of intent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you've really given us some great advice here and strategies to go about the way that we would do succession planning. And I really do want to thank you for your sensitivity to family dynamics, because there are so many different ways a family can look like. So thank you for thinking of the families that don't have multiple children, or the families that might not have siblings that want to be involved with their sibling, or the families that don't communicate well together. I mean, you've kind of given us all the different scenarios. And the great thing is teams can be created, and it doesn't have to be direct family members. And things can be put in place so that our loved ones can be taken care of and do the things that they love and still have a great quality of life. And I just love the way that you presented it to us. And I think our listeners are definitely going to have some good takeaways from this. It was much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, John.
That was a great wrap up, Kristen. Thank you.
Kristen's always good at that.
Very good. Awesome.